Praise God, give thanks to the Father in all that you say and do. Well, amen, amen. Sing glory, hallelujah.
This is being made. I want to thank you for being with us as we continue to seek the old paths. Well, we are going to begin our study tonight in a brand new book of the Bible, and that is of Ecclesiastes. As you recall, we have been studying through the wisdom literature. And so we have covered a lot of ground, and we're just really going to give you sort of the highlights of this really fascinating book. And as always, I encourage you to study further on your own, and hopefully you have the study guide that has been made available, which is Give Us a King. Now, the last half of this book, roughly, has been the wisdom literature, and it's included in the book about the United Kingdom, because that's when most of it was written down. It didn't all happen then, but it was mostly recorded during the days of David and Solomon. Now we have gone through several categories of Bible history. Remember, we have divided the Bible into 17 categories. Now here's a chart that you have seen several times if you've been with us very often. And we started with the creation, and then the flood, scattering of the people, the patriarchs, the exodus from Egypt, the wandering, the conquest of Canaan, the judges, and now the United Kingdom. Now our next period of study will be the divided kingdom. Now let me mention now, if you have not yet ordered your workbook, your study guide on the divided kingdom, why not go ahead and do that? Use that phone number or that email address or mailing address, and you will find that this completely free of charge. We'll get one of these very nice study guides, reference books to you, and I think you'll be glad to have it in your library as you, from time to time, come back to the things that are covered in here, and you've got great resource material, reference material for your study. Just like tonight with Ecclesiastes. There's so much more in our study guide that we just don't have time to cover it with the time frame that we are working within. And so as we go back to our chart now, next again is the divided kingdom. And again, order that book if you haven't done so. And then after that is Judah alone. Now this same book will cover that time period as well. And then there's the captivity, the return from captivity, and that ends the Old Testament as far as the writing of it is concerned. Now the Old Testament remains God's plan for the Jewish people until we come now through what's called the years of silence. That's 400 years where there's no inspired writings from God. And then that is broken by the life of Christ as we come to our New Testament. And then the early church and letters to Christians, and there we are at the book of Revelation, from Genesis to Revelation. And so I hope that you'll stay with us, and if this is your first time, this is a good time to start because we're covering a brand new book. Now, as we look again at where we are, remember we talked about Job, then Psalms, then Proverbs. Tonight is Ecclesiastes. Then we will go to the Song of Solomon, and after that we'll begin our new book. So it's almost here. You think about Ecclesiastes. Ecclesiastes is sort of a strange sounding word, isn't it? And as you turn in your Bibles there, remember Psalms, Proverbs, and then Ecclesiastes. You'll see that it's not a very large book. In fact, you'll find that it has 12 chapters. The word Ecclesiastes comes from a Hebrew word that is koheleth. The word means preacher. In Ecclesiastes, it is the koheleth that addresses us. In fact, he says, the words of the preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. Again, that word that is translated in English, preacher, in Hebrew is the koheleth. Now the writer himself identifies himself as Solomon. It seems that with almost every book of the Bible, there's somebody that wants to argue about who wrote it. Now admittedly, there are a few that it's a little bit hard to tell. But with Ecclesiastes, I don't think it should be. And yet there are those who want to write books about who wrote Ecclesiastes. But notice what the writer himself says. As we just read in chapter 1 and verse 1, he says he's the son of David, king in Jerusalem. Now you recall from our recent study of David that Zion or Jerusalem was known as his city. Well, then he says in verse 12, I, the preacher, was king over Israel in Jerusalem. Well, Solomon was the son of David. He was king over Israel in Jerusalem. And then he says in verse 16, he says, I have attained greatness and have gained more wisdom than all who were before me in Jerusalem. You remember what Solomon's claim to fame is, you might say. His great wisdom that he received from God because he asked God for wisdom. And so it seems very obvious that the writer of Ecclesiastes is Solomon. Now, I mentioned there's 12 chapters. If you divide those chapters into the logical dividing points, there are really 4 discourses in Ecclesiastes. And here's a chart that'll show you the breakdown. And you'll notice the first discourse covers chapter 1 through chapter 2, verse 6. Then there's the second, the third. The fourth, of course, ends up in chapter 12, the end of chapter 12, which is the end of the book. And so these are this little study aids to help us more logically approach the study and to gain the most that we can from the book. Now, you think about every book in the Bible has a basic message. Now, sometimes it's a little bit hard to narrow it down to just one. Let me tell you what the author of our study guide says about the basic message of this book. The whole book is an argument that it is God who gives us the ability to enjoy life, and that apart from Him, life is empty and meaningless. All of life is therefore summed up in the responsibility to seek a relationship with God and to live life His way. That's from Brother Bob Waldron. You think about that. As you read Ecclesiastes, keep that in mind. The whole book is an argument that it is God who gives us the ability to enjoy life, and that apart from Him, life is empty and meaningless. That's important as we try to understand some of the statements that we're going to see. We have to understand the context of that. When he talks about life being vanity and grasping after the wind, and really you could look at it and think, wow, this life just isn't worth living. But what he's saying is, if this life is all that there is, then maybe you can make that argument. And we'll notice some of those points as we go. But there is God. There's God. And because there is God, life is worth living, because this is not all that there is. And so let's take a little journey now through Ecclesiastes. I think it'll help in your study to have some terms in mind and what they mean. Because several times you'll see the same words, and for instance, under the sun. Under the sun. Well, that just means upon the earth. Also, under heaven is another idea. Chapter 1, verse 9, and there is nothing new under the sun. You know, our thought process, when we say under the sun, we could encompass more than the earth, but not in Solomon's day and time. Under the sun just meant everything that's on the earth, everything that's seeable, that's visual. Life on this earth. And so he would say, there's nothing new under the sun as you really examine life. There's a pattern to it. There's an ebb and flow of life. Now, he's not meaning to say nothing new will be invented. No, that's not his point. As far as life itself and the struggles of life, it all happens, it comes, it goes, it happens to us all. But also the word vanity. The word vanity is used several times, many times in fact, in Ecclesiastes. But what does that mean? Well, sometimes we think about a person being vain. You know, we think about them having too high of an opinion of themselves and such as that, very vain. Think the world centers around them maybe. But vanity means sorry, empty, worthless, fleeting. You know, it's just nothing there. It's vanity. It's of no lasting benefit. The writer concludes that there is nothing of any meaning apart from God. Chapter 1 and verse 14. All is vanity and grasping for the wind. Now, can you grab the wind? Well, that's just a pointless attempt, isn't it? The wind can blow and you can try to catch some of it, open your hand. It's just, it's not there, is it? And so he would say about life, it seems like it's just vanity. It's like trying to catch the wind, trying to grasp the wind. All is vanity. And so remember, the word means empty, worthless, fleeting. Other commonly used terms would be profit. Profit. Now we have a little better idea about what that means. But profit is that which has been gained and has lasting value. Now that's a key difference. We might think of profit as what we make after our cost, but no, profit is that, it is that which we've gained, but it's also that has lasting value. Chapter 1 and verse 3, for instance. What profit has a man from all his labor in which he toils under the sun? Now, what is bothering him is what is of lasting value from everything that you might do. Remember, this is Solomon, one of the richest men that probably ever lived. And he says, what profit has a man from all of his labor in which he toils under the sun? And then there's the idea of wisdom. Of wisdom. Now, we just studied Proverbs, a book of wisdom. But I think we'll find a little bit different use in many places in Ecclesiastes. Now, there's worldly wisdom, and certainly worldly wisdom is that which has no lasting profit. It might sound good, and it might be what most people think, but it really has no lasting profit. So we look in passages like chapter 1 and verse 16. Say, look, I have attained greatness and have gained more wisdom than all who were before me. And I set my heart to know wisdom and to know madness and folly. I perceive that this also is grasping for the wind. For in much wisdom is much grief, and he who increases knowledge increases sorrow. Now let's pause here. We'll talk about what Solomon is trying to accomplish in this book. Remember here he says, I set my heart to know wisdom and to know madness and folly. Solomon wanted to find the meaning of life. What is it all about? Is there meaning to life? And so he just tried it all. Again, we'll notice some of these passages, but he tried everything. He didn't hold anything back from himself. Anything that was to be a pleasure, anything that was to elevate the mind of man, the sensual pleasures, the mental pleasures, the physical pleasures, whatever might make life meaningful. Solomon tried it. And he thought about it. And he came back to the same conclusion over and over. It just has no lasting value. Sometimes you'll see the term the wise man. The wise man. Well, this is one who has learned much information. In other words, he's well educated. But now there's a difference between the use of the term in Ecclesiastes and the use in Proverbs. Now I want us to notice now from our study guide, and this is from our current study guide now, page 198. And you turn to page 198, and here's just a little bit of that information that we won't have time to look at nearly all of it. But here is several words that are defined for us as we go through Ecclesiastes. And on number 5, on page 198, it says, the wise man is merely the one who has learned much information. We mentioned that. It says this use of the term fits with the rest of the book because Solomon's study was about life under the sun. Is the gaining of an education the end-all purpose in life? Can the well-educated man depend on his education to bring him happiness and fulfillment in life? And the answer is no. It is only grasping after wind. Now, he's not saying not to be educated, but if you think that's going to be the source of your ultimate happiness, Solomon the wise man says no. Because he sees bad things happen to the well-educated as well as the one who he'll call the fool. They all go the same way. They all come and they all go. Speaking of the fool is one who refuses to learn from his own experiences or those of others. Now, we saw that a good bit in Proverbs, and that's in keeping with that same idea. For example, chapter 2 and verse 14. The wise man's eyes are in his head, but the fool walks in darkness. And so the fool, again, is one who refuses to learn from his own experiences. Have you ever made the same mistake over and over? We need to be careful about that. We need to learn from our mistakes. And then sometime the writer would refer to the young man. The young man. Well, what he's talking about when you'll see those references, and we'll look at one, it is one who because of youth has not yet experienced life. Well, he's young and foolish, as we might sometimes say. And sometimes we'll talk about the dangers of youth or the inexperience of youth or make some reference to excuse some behavior because, well, they're young. They don't know any better. Well, the young man, he has not yet experienced life. And now, young people, you need to realize that and pay a little attention to those who have experienced life. The fool, remember, is the one who doesn't learn from his own mistakes or of those of others. And so in Ecclesiastes 11, verse 9, rejoice, O young man, in your youth, and let your heart cheer you in the days of your youth. And it's a great time of life. But, O young man, rejoice and let your heart cheer you. He's going to talk about later on, remember your Creator in the days of your youth. It's a wonderful time, but realize that you have not yet experienced life. And so you don't have the wisdom of those who are older than you. Now, we mentioned that the book is divided into 4 discourses. And now we're just going to look at a summary because, again, we just don't have time, but we'll try to notice a few passages. And I want you to go back. I hope you'll go back and you'll study this book in greater detail. And so as you look at the first chapter and part of chapter 2, all the way through chapter 2. He's saying in this that temporal things may bring momentary joy. These earthly physical things. However, there is nothing on earth that can provide lasting fulfillment. The ability to enjoy life is a gift from God. And life without God brings no profit. And so you'll find those kind of ideas presented all through. We looked at verse 14 about, I've seen all the works that are done under the sun, and indeed all is vanity and grasping for the wind. And he would say in chapter 1 and verse 2, he says, vanity of vanities, says the preacher. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. What profit has a man from all his labor in which he toils under the sun? One generation passes away, and another generation comes, but the earth abides forever. The sun also rises, and the sun goes down, and hastens to the place where it arose. The wind goes toward the south, and turns around to the north. The wind whirls about continually, and comes again on its circuit. It's just a cycle, and it just comes and it goes and it just keeps going. But man leaves and leaves it all behind. In chapter 2, in verse 18, he said, then I hated all my labor in which I had toiled under the sun, because I must leave it to the man who will come after me. And who knows whether he will be wise or a fool? Yet he will rule over all my labor. This also is vanity. Therefore I turned my heart and despaired of all the labor in which I had toiled under the sun. For there is a man whose labor is with wisdom, knowledge, and skill, yet he must leave his heritage to a man who has not labored for it. This also is vanity and a great evil. For what has man for all his labor, with which he has toiled under the sun? For all his days are sorrowful, and his work burdensome. Even in the night his heart takes no rest. This also is vanity. Nothing is better for a man than that he should eat and drink, and that his soul should enjoy good in his labor. This also I saw was from the hand of God. For who can eat, or who can have enjoyment more than I? And so you see, the wise man is just thinking through all the circumstances of life. And so he finally sees that to enjoy what he does have while he has it, well, that's a gift from God. And he ought to take it that way. For it says, as we continue that passage, for God gives wisdom and knowledge and joy to a man who is good in his sight, but to the sinner he gives the work of gathering and collecting, that he may give to him who is good before God. This is also vanity and grasping for the wind. And then we go to the second discourse, which starts in chapter 3. He says, God has a plan and is in charge. That's important. Man has an innate desire to understand God's plan. Although he searches continually, he will never have complete understanding. Man must therefore depend upon God. Do you see the thought process he's going through here? It is so important for us to realize God has a plan. He has a plan. Oh, we can't figure it all out. We don't know what it's all about. You know, God can see the end from the beginning. We cannot. And we must therefore have faith and trust in our God. And so in Ecclesiastes 3 and verse 10, I have seen the God-given task which the sons of men are to be occupied. He has made everything beautiful in its time. Also he has put eternity in their hearts, except that no one can find out the work that God does from the beginning to the end. I know that nothing is better for them than to rejoice and to do good in their lives, and also that every man should eat and drink and enjoy the good of all his labor. It is the gift of God. And then he says, in the third discourse, he says, God's in control. It starts in chapter 6. God is in control. It is only through Him that man can find meaning in life. Prosperity is not necessarily a blessing. Sometimes we think the rich have it made, but we haven't been in their shoes. And the wise man says they have their own trouble, their own sorrows. But, riches do not do away with the problems of life. So in Ecclesiastes 6 and verse 1, there is an evil which I have seen under the sun, and it is common among men. A man to whom God has given riches and wealth and honor, so that he lacks nothing for himself of all he desires, yet God does not give him power to eat of it. But a foreigner consumes it. This is vanity, and is an evil affliction. Chapter 7 and verse 13, consider the work of God, for who can make straight what He has made crooked? In the day of prosperity, be joyful, but in the day of adversity, consider it. In other words, learn from it. Surely God has appointed the one as well as the other, so man can find out nothing that will come after him. So enjoy. When times are good, enjoy it. When times are not so good, learn from it. Learn from it. And then the fourth discourse, which takes us to the end of the chapter. It starts in chapter 8, verse 16. Man will never understand all God does. We get in trouble. We get in trouble when we think we can figure it out ourselves, or when we think we know what God is doing or what He should be doing. No, the wise man says you'll never understand all that God does. Life's mysteries should not affect man's ability to enjoy it. Just because we can't figure it out doesn't mean we can't enjoy it. In the end, man must give an account to God for all his deeds, because that's the conclusion of the matter. Fear God and keep His commandments. And you think about that. After the wise man, Solomon, set out in chapter 1 to find the meaning of life, the more he looked and the more he tried to find it, the more it was like trying to grasp the wind. Why, people come and they go. just like animals, come and they go. And you work hard, and you develop, and you build up some things, and what do? You go, and you leave it to somebody else. And then that somebody else, who knows what they'll do with it? They may not have the wisdom and the work ethic that you had. Don't we see this in life today? You find a generation that works so hard, and maybe become wealthy, and then their children blow it because they didn't come up working hard and having to make it work. They didn't have the same wisdom, or maybe they didn't have the same circumstances. But in any event, Solomon says this is just vanity. But he says in the end, what's going to matter is our life before God. Because that's the conclusion he comes to. Fear God and keep His commandments. That is it. That is the sum of all his search for the meaning of life. And so in Ecclesiastes 8 and verse 16, he said, when I applied my heart to know wisdom and to see the business that is done on earth, then I saw all the work of God, that a man cannot find out the work that is done under the sun. And then chapter 11 and verse 9, rejoice, O man, in your youth, and let your heart cheer you in the days of your youth. Walk in the ways of your heart and in the sight of your eyes, but know that for all these, God will bring you into judgment. Yeah, that's great advice to young people. Enjoy being young, but don't be young and foolish. Don't think somehow your youth excuses you in doing wrong. Enjoy the good health, enjoy the energy, and enjoy the young days maybe of your marriage and your children growing up. Those are wonderful times. But in all of this, know that God will bring you into judgment. So you never forget God. And so he says in chapter 12 and verse 6, remember your Creator before the silver cord is loosed, or the golden bowl is broken, or the pitcher shattered at the fountain, or the wheel broken at the well. Then the dust will return to the earth as it was, and the spirit will return to God who gave it. All of those expressions are metaphors for the coming of old age, when things just don't work like they used to. But he says in chapter 12 and verse 13, let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear God and keep His commandments, for this is man's all. For God will bring every work into judgment, including every secret thing, whether good or evil. Do you see? He says, this is it. This is the summation of his lifelong quest to know it all, to know what is the purpose of life. Here it is. Fear God and keep His commandments, for this is man's all. What about you? What about me? Do we live our life realizing that one day God will bring every work into judgment, including every secret thing, whether good or evil? Let's live a life that is pleasing to God. Let's seek the old paths where the good way is and walk in it. Then we will find rest for our souls. Thank you so much for being with us. Join us next time as we go to that just seldom used book of the Bible, the Song of Solomon. And let's always seek the old paths.
A blind man sat by the road and he cried. A blind man sat by the road and he cried. A blind man sat by the road and he cried.